The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Part 1. God has given me a passion for sociology, which is a study of how society develops through mankind's behavioural patterns. Now, understand that most religious videos and teachings and preachings are basically theological in nature, but God speaks to me through a wider lens, and I believe this gives greater insight. So it is through this lens that I will often be presenting the things that God has shown me. So in this video, and there will be others where I will be using both theological and sociological insights to form my argument. Babylon, the city. In the last video, we looked at the Scarlet Woman being Babylon, but Babylon is also referred to as a city. God sent a flood during the time of Noah because the sons of God had gone into the daughters of men and had children with them. These sons of God were fallen angels who had joined with Lucifer and had been banished from heaven, and so the seed of Satan had entered the bloodline of mankind. Now, there are those that will dispute who the sons of God are and who the daughters of men are, but the important thing here is, and it doesn't really matter about, getting into arguments about that, the important thing is to understand that the seed of Satan had entered the bloodline of mankind. Now, Satan wants to defile the bloodline of humanity. That's what he's been doing since the beginning, ever since the Garden of Eden. Satan has been out to in the Garden of Eden, Satan was out to defile Adam and Eve so that they could no longer be bearers of God's glory. And he succeeded. And so we see this being repeated in stories throughout the Bible, accounts of mankind falling for sin and coming under the power and influence of Satan. If you need to understand a bit more about when we become defiled, that we can no longer bear God's glory, if you want to go back to my first video in the Who is the Bride of Christ series, I explain it quite thoroughly there. So after the flood, it was at Babel or Babylon that Satan tried again to defile humanity through pride and self-idolatry. Historically, Babel is where man came together to create a new world system. Satan wants to replace God's kingdom system so that he can be its king. He wants to rule the earth. This is one of the temptations that Satan offered Jesus in the wilderness. He offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the world, but he expected Jesus to worship at his feet. So ultimately, Satan would be king over all the kingdoms of the earth. Now, this is also the same intent that the Antichrist will have. The Antichrist wants to rule the nations from Jerusalem. He wants to sit on Jesus' throne in Jerusalem and rule the nations of the world. Now, Babel may not have geographically covered the entire earth, but it figuratively encompassed all of mankind, because the citizens of Babel were made up of all the generations after the flood. They travelled to the plain of Shinar and began building the city of Babel. In Genesis 11, 1 through 9, it says this: Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So it says here in this bit here, the whole earth. Now the plains of Shinar is Babylon. So we see that Babylon is a world system because it encompasses the whole earth. So it's not America, not the Catholic Church, nor a modern-day Roman Empire. It is something that encompasses the whole earth. So from verse 3 it says, "Then they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves.'" So they didn't want to make a name for God. They wanted to make a name for themselves. And it goes on, "Lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Now, this was also in direct rebellion against God's command to fill the earth. Instead of filling the earth, they came together to join as one. Verse 5, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, 'Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech.' So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, which was what he'd commanded them to do. And they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth." So all those that were of the generations after the flood came together and united to become one and to build a city. That city was Babylon. They wanted to make a name for themselves, and they did not want to be scattered over the earth. They also built a tower. Now we know, because the scriptures tell us, that the builders wanted to make a name for themselves. Hence they attempted to build a monument to their own greatness. The monument was to set themselves up as a power center to their own fame, glory, and ambition. They wanted one united government that would rule over all rather than obey God's commands. So the people wanted to make a name for themselves rather than glorifying God. Also, the tower was meant to be high enough to save themselves if ever God sent another flood. So to summarize this, they built the city to glorify themselves, and they built the tower to save themselves. Now, this has always been the crux of man's rebellion, that he is constantly building his own systems, schemes, and doctrines by which he can glorify himself and save himself. Most of the doctrine that is preached today is self-glorifying. For example, prosperity and word of faith teaching. Or it is trying to save ourselves. Examples of this would be the saved by grace alone and the pre-tribulation rapture teaching. Humanity is always looking to itself for salvation instead of trusting in God to save us. We are saved through surrender, not by building things. We are saved by grace and not through our own efforts. When we understand our total dependence on God for our salvation, then we genuinely want to glorify Him for the love and mercy He has so undeservedly poured out on us. This is a quote from Bible History Online. The word Babylon. Babylon is Akkadian. Babylani, which means the gate of God or the gate of gods, and it became the capital of the land of Babylonia. The etymology of the name Babel in the Bible means confused. We get that from Genesis 11 verse 9. And throughout the Bible, Babylon was a symbol of the confusion caused by godliness. The name Babylon is the Greek form of the Hebrew name Babel. Now this is important. The Bible reveals that all false systems of religion began in the land of Babylon and will have their consummation from the spirit of Babylon in the last days, unquote. So all false religions began in the land of Babylon. So here is our connection between Babylon the city in the end times and the scarlet woman, who is called Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots in the end times. Because out of an end times Babylonian system will come a defiled, apostate harlot church. Now back to Babylon the city, but now through a sociological lens. Historically, Babylon took on a holistic form by bringing together various conceptual elements, those of culture, government, economy, and ecology. Now, these are the same 4 areas that make up any society. It's very important to understand these 4 areas so that we can understand what is happening in our day and times. Because a lot of Christians don't understand what's happening in the world and why it seems to be imploding in every aspect of society. And that's because Babylon affects every aspect of our society. Now, if we look at these 4 areas of culture, government, economy, and ecology in our day, we see that first our culture is imploding, our governments are disintegrating, our economies are fragile, and our environment is being destroyed. So ever since the escalation of globalization last century, we are clearly seeing Babylon forming again, especially when we look at what's happening in these 4 areas. And I would say that the escalation began with the formation of the United Nations Organization in 1945. The 2 world wars that preceded this were fertile ground in which to grow a one world governing body to control conflict and other issues in the earth. Now, I think that it's very interesting that Babylon's reformation started escalating at the same time Israel was reestablished, because the reestablishment of Israel is one of the clear prophecies of end-time events. So what is globalization? So this is what it is as defined by UNESCO. So, quote, globalization is the ongoing process that is linking people, neighborhoods, cities, regions, and countries more closely together than they ever have been before. This has resulted in our lives being intertwined with people in all parts of the world via the food we eat, the clothing we wear, the music we listen to, the information we get, and the ideas we hold. This interconnectedness amongst humans on the planet is sometimes also referred to as the global village, where the barriers of national and international boundaries become less relevant and the world, figuratively, a smaller place. The process is driven economically by international financial flows and trade, technology, by information technology and mass media entertainment, and very significantly also by very human means such as cultural exchanges, migration, and international tourism. As one commentator remarked, we now live in a networked world. While globalization is not a new process, it has accelerated rapidly since World War II and is having many effects on people, the environment, cultures, national governments, economic development, and human well-being in countries around the world, end quote. Now, just hopping back a little bit to what happened at Babel, when they came together to unite and build a one world government, God scattered them and gave them different languages, and they were scattered across the world, and those different cultures and languages that God scattered them into kept them apart, so they weren't united. Well, now what we see with globalization, and especially the escalation of globalization since the middle of last century, is all the cultures and the peoples and the languages all coming back together to form one united world government again. Not just a government, it's a system, because it includes those 4 areas. So, according to this definition by UNESCO, there are clearly 4 major areas that globalization has left its significant mark on: environment, cultures, national governments, and economic development. Now, cultural globalization refers to the transmission of ideas. You know, it is our ideology. Our societies develop around our ideology, right? So it's the transmission of our ideas, meanings, and values around the world in such a way as to extend and intensify social relations. Now, religious evangelism falls into this category, spreading the gospel worldwide. So political globalization refers to the growth of the worldwide political system, both in size and complexity. That system includes national governments, their governmental and intergovernmental organizations, as well as government-independent elements of global civil society, such as international non-governmental organization and social movement organizations. So, look, a good example of this is the international laws for shipping. You know, now that ever since containers were invented and they could ship mass trade around the world between countries, they had to develop an international law for shipping. So it doesn't come under one country. It's an international global law, right? So what this is saying here is each country still governs itself, but it is also affected by international laws, and the United Nations also has international laws that every nation on the earth is supposed to adhere to. And when a nation doesn't adhere to it, then when they break with protocol or break the laws, then the United Nations is supposed to put restraints on that country to bring them back under, or to make them behave themselves and follow the international laws. We can see that taking place at the moment with North Korea. They're misbehaving according to international law, so they are putting restrictions on them, economic restrictions on them, and sanctions to try and get them to behave again. Okay, so economic globalization is the increasing economic integration and interdependence of national, regional, and local economies across the world through an intensification of cross-border movement of goods, services, technology, and capital. Now, as I was saying before, with shipping and things like that, you have international trade between nations, where once upon a time that was kept pretty much within the country. You just traded with your neighbour, or the man in the next village, or whatever. But now it's international, and it isn't even just big businesses that trade internationally. Any person in their home can now trade on an international level through things like eBay and Amazon. So the effects of globalization on the environment have come under heavy criticism in the past. It is thought that globalization is a major contributor to global warming due to its emphasis on international travel and trade as well as industry. Statistics showed that compared to 1950, right, going back to the middle again of last century, emissions of carbon dioxide in the year 2000 had increased fourfold. Now, let me just say something about the environment before we move on. This area, which is often overlooked or dismissed totally as irrelevant in theology, but something that will become very clear in my next two videos, that is an extremely important area to God. That is how we affect the environment we live in. This is another area where mankind has rebelled against God. We were to tend the earth. God held us responsible for the well-being of the land. One of the major reasons given for Israel going into captivity to Assyria and Babylon was her failure to rest the land every 7 years. Israel failed to give the land its Sabbath rest, which God had commanded. Now, that command's recorded in Leviticus 26, verses 27 through to 46. Now, when man leaves God's plan and follows his own, it always affects the environment. It causes a curse to come on the land. I'm going to get to that. If it doesn't come up in the next video, it will come up in 2 videos' time. Now, and when God sends his judgments on mankind, it always includes natural calamities, environmental calamities like locusts, frogs, disease, floods, boils, dying fish. God will withhold the rains, so it causes the land to go to desert, diseased livestock, vines that fail to produce fruit, hailstorms, and wild animals that start attacking people and things like that. You cannot separate the land. That is, you cannot separate the environment from God's interaction with mankind. Now, why is it important to look at these 4 areas of society? Why is it important to know about the 4 areas that globalization affects? Because the fact that we can see that these areas are collapsing are evidence of the reformation of the Babylonian system, a global system that is manufactured by man but under the power and influence of Satan, and how this system materially and spiritually impacts the world we are living in. When you start to see society collapsing, and we're seeing it on a global level, then we know that Babylon is being reformed because we're moving away from God. As we move away from God, the curse comes. It comes on the land. And because the world is moving, we're moving at a global pace away from God, then the world is feeling the impact of the curse. It's a curse we've put on there through our actions. Okay, now, because Satan is once again succeeding in defiling humanity. Now, the reason he's doing that is to try and stop the bride from emerging. If he can defile this generation, we will not be able to bear God's glory. And this is the flood that Satan is sending after the woman. But God has taken her into the wilderness to protect her. So in Revelations 12, from verse 13, it says, "Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the man-child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, we can see the mother of Mary in this, where Herod, was going to kill all the children, and God took her and saved her. We can also see that God is going to save his people Israel when the Antichrist has his armies surrounding Israel, and that happens at the middle of the tribulation period. They get 30 days for Israel, and God will save them. He'll take them out into the wilderness and protect them. But God has also been protecting his bride at this time by taking her into a spiritual wilderness, withdrawing her out of the Babylonian church system and taking her into the wilderness in order to protect her. So then now we're going to take a look at these 4 areas of society, but now through a biblical lens. So, the 4 horsemen. Revelation 6 verses 1 to 8, the first seal, the Conqueror, the white horse. Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now, there's a lot of people who believe that this is Christ, but it's not Christ. It is someone who is trying to look like Christ. It is deception. So this person, or what this represents, is actually deception. It's not Christ, it's something that's trying to look like Christ. Now, the interesting thing is that it only has a bow. It doesn't have the arrows. Now, if it had the arrows, we would know that it had weaponry, it was war. But because it only has a bow, it's referring to ideology. It's talking about a warfare that is done without actual physical weapons. And so that's a spiritual warfare. So this is deception. So this is talking about deception being released upon the earth. So when we hark back to one of the 4 areas of society, this is referring to cultural globalization. So this is deception. It is clear that we are moving further and further away from God's ideology and moving onward towards man's ideology. Now, the second seal is conflict on the earth, the red horse. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come and see." Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. Now, this is political. This is talking about government. It's talking about war and rumours of war and raging war and conflict on the earth, which comes under governmental, political. Now, the third seal, scarcity on the earth, the black horse. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hands. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." This is economic. This is talking about the economy, what it costs to buy and trade. And restricted economy specifically it's talking about. Fourth seal, widespread death on the earth, the pale horse. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the four living creatures saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. This is environmental. This is our ecology it's talking about. Now it's also let me just summarize there. They're the four areas. The first four seals are the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and the four horsemen of the apocalypse and the four seals are the four areas that affect society. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the four horsemen are being sent out to affect isn't a good word, to take some kind of control in what is taking place in society on the earth. Don't know if that helps, but there we go. Okay, it's also very, very important to just look back at these verses and note that each seal is introduced to us by one of each of the four living creatures that are before the throne of God. So I'll go more into this in a bit. So let us now look at how Jesus explained the first four seals. So Matthew 24, 3-7, he says, the disciples ask him, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So they're asking, what are going to be the signs of the end of the age? And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and many will deceive you." So the first seal, the white horse, is deception. Now, deception is our ideology. That is what our culture is built around. And Jesus went on to say, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdoms." So the second seal, the red horse, is political. It's governmental. It's wars and rumors of wars. Jesus goes on to say, "And there will be famines." That's the third seal, the black horse, which is economic. And he says there will be pestilences and earthquakes in various places. So the fourth seal, the pale horse, is environmental. So Jesus even quotes them in exactly the same order as they are given to John in his revelation. Now the four horsemen are the first four seals to be opened. They are also the four living creatures that are around the throne worshipping God. In Revelations 4, 6-11 it says, "Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and around the throne were four living creatures, full of eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second living creature like a calf, the third living creature had a face like a man, and the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle. The four living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within, and they do not rest day or night, saying, 'Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come.' Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever, and cast their thrones before him, saying, You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. The four living creatures are representative of all creation. Man, lion, ox, and eagle, they are before the throne to represent all creation in worship and glorifying God, because he is sovereign ruler over all creation. But now the four horsemen have ridden out from the throne room and have come to earth. They are the first four seals, and they are open. We know this because Babylon is reforming. Now, what is very important to understand is this. It is Jesus that opens the seals. Now, if Jesus opens the seals, then we have to understand that it is God's purpose that these four horsemen are being sent to the earth. Jesus sends the four horsemen down to the earth to perform a task. So what is that task that he's given them to perform? Now, for the answer to this, we need to go back to the book of Ezekiel, where, interestingly enough, we see that the four horsemen have ridden out before. In my next video, I'll show you clearly about the four horsemen being the four first seals, and that they are the same. Now, what happened in the time of Ezekiel then should shed more light on what's happening in our times. So thank you for listening.